The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 32. Firings, Families, and Forewarnings. As it turned out, being a part of the inquisitorial squad had mostly been a whole lot of nothing. Professor Umbridge had them turning out pockets and checking book bags for contraband items. Pansy and sometimes Millie seemed to enjoy this most, but Draco was fairly certain that Greg, Vince, Montague, and Warrington were all too dumb to recognize contraband, even if it bit them on the face. As for Draco, he half-heartedly checked the contents of the pockets of first-years, who had nothing more sinister than a fanged frisbee or nosebleed nougat to worry about. Their first major task had been early one evening. Draco had been lying in bed, reading a novel that had been recommended by Hermione, something about two angels, one from heaven and one from hell, when a silver cat jumped into the bed next to him and scared the living hell out of him. In an even more creepy turn of events, Dolores Umbridge's voice issued from the cat's mouth. "All members of the inquisitorial squad, please report to the entrance hall." Draco did not rush to throw on his school robes, leisurely making his way up the stairs from the dungeons. He was surprised to find the area packed with students, and he pushed forward through the crowd in order to find Professor Umbridge. She was on the stairs, looking down imperiously at the divination teacher, Professor Trelawney, who stood alone in a clearing in the center of the hall. Trelawney was crying piteously, and the crowd looked on nervously, whispering to each other. Umbridge was speaking, and Draco strained to hear her. "It was your home until about an hour ago, when the Minister of Magic countersigned the order for your dismissal. Now, kindly remove yourself from this hall. You are embarrassing us." Well, she had done it. Draco had known that it was inevitable. Trelawney's demeanor in class had become frantic, distracted, that of someone who knew they were marching to the guillotine. Draco supposed that the inquisitorial squad's role here was just to maintain order. He was surprised to see Professor McGonagall, then Professor Dumbledore, step up to defend the now former professor. Through the commotion, Draco was able to gather that Dumbledore had outsmarted Umbridge by appointing a centaur to act as the new divination teacher, and that Professor Trelawney would be able to stay as a guest of Dumbledore. It took all that he had not to laugh. As many steps as Umbridge took to beat everyone, Dumbledore had taken more. Looking up into the crowd, Draco spotted Hermione staring down at him sadly. Draco knew that Hermione had no love lost for Trelawney, but even he had been moved to see the frail witch nearly tossed out. Sure, she was a crap teacher, teaching a fake subject, but no one deserved the public humiliation that Umbridge was willing to dole out. He touched his breast pocket in their little sign of connection, and she touched the cuff on her wrist with a small smile before turning back up the stairs to Gryffindor Tower. An hour later, he felt his pocket warm. "That was horrible to watch, and I don't even care much for Trelawney. I'm worried that Hagrid is next," he replied. "It's possible. She does not seem to care for half-breeds, that much is clear. Hopefully, he's ready for her." Hagrid had been on his mind a good bit lately. His lessons had been exemplary, no injuries or blasted scroot mutants in sight. But Professor Umbridge had been complaining about creatures being allowed in her office and destroying her things, intimating that Hagrid had been involved. Deciding to take advantage of his leader of the inquisitorial squad status, Draco made his way out of the castle and down to Hagrid's hut. It had been some time since he'd visited the man, and he hoped that he had not worn out his welcome. He knocked quickly and heard Hagrid shushing the booming Fang inside. "Oh, it's you, Malfoy. Everything all right?" "Yes, just wondering how you're getting on. Is Umbridge still giving you grief?" The older wizard let him inside, closing the door behind them. Draco sat down at the table, and Fang rested his massive jaw on his knee. Draco pet him obediently. "Ah, she's a strange old bird, but she's no match for Professor Dumbledore. And, truth be told, if she were looking for a long-term position here, she chose the wrong job." Hagrid chuckled to himself. Draco had to agree. They had had 5 Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers in 5 years. It was not a job for the tenure-seeking witch or wizard. "Hagrid, what about all these injuries? You came back from the mountains with them after you found the giants, but why do you still have them?" "How do you know about that?" The big man looked alarmed. Draco gave him a wry smirk. "You know who my father is, and what he's capable of finding out." "That's true, I do. Well, if you must know, you recall that article in the paper that old Skeeter did on me? Well, got me thinking about my family. Turns out, my mum wasn't the only giant in my family." A tingle ran up Draco's spine. "What exactly do you mean, Hagrid?" "Well, I have a little brother, see? I mean to say, he's not so little. Stands up bigger than me, to be honest. But Groppy, he's so gentle. He don't mean to hurt me. And he's learning so much." The spine tingle was now a full-bodied chill. "Hagrid, when you say he is learning so much, Hagrid, are you saying that this giant is here at Hogwarts?" "Well, he stays in the forest. He's not a danger. He just doesn't know his own strength. Please, Malfoy, you can't tell anyone about this." Draco slumped, his head in his hands. Hermione was right. Hagrid would be next. This was Norbert all over again, except now Hagrid had Professor Umbridge watching his every move. A couple of nights later, he was sitting on his bed again, deeply engrossed in the Angel novel. There were many things within it that he did not understand, but it was intriguing nonetheless. Draco found the discussion of witchcraft to be particularly funny. When he pictured the Dark Angel in his mind, he sort of thought of Professor Moody. Well, whoever he knew of as Professor Moody from 4th year. His handkerchief warmed in his pocket. "How are you enjoying divination class? I hear there's a bunch of lying around in the grass and staring up into the trees." He smirked and wrote back, "You know I only like to lie in the grass if it's with you." He could practically feel her blush through the handkerchief, and he smiled as memories of that night on the freshly mown grass of the Quidditch pitch flooded his mind. "And your extra duties? I hear you found a lot of contraband, fanged frisbees and such." "Indeed, I have. Let's hope you're not hiding any contraband, Granger." "Are you planning to frisk me?" It was his turn to flush hot. He cast a quick cooling charm over the bed and changed the subject. "How are your meetings going?" "Very well. Harry is an excellent teacher, although it's hard to find nights to meet. He's been doing extra occlumency lessons with Professor Snape." "I've read The Theory of Occlumency. I've tried to practice it myself, but I need to improve, especially if things get worse at home." He knew she would understand what he meant. If he ever encountered Bellatrix, or even worse, Lord Voldemort, he would need to have strong walls in place to keep her out of his mind. "Perhaps Professor Snape can help you as well, although I don't think he and Harry work very well together." "That doesn't at all surprise me." He chuckled to himself, recalling all of the times over the years that Potter and Snape had sparred with each other. "Have a good night, Draco." "You too, Hermione." Draco continued to be at the reluctant beck and call of Umbridge in the ensuing weeks, performing mundane tasks designed to terrorize and annoy both students and teachers alike. He found it exhausting, and particularly hated her Patronus, the prissy-looking cat that pranced back and forth as it spoke, in her annoying little girl voice. The Easter holidays were approaching. Ordinarily, Draco would look forward to going home to the manor, if nothing else than to see Pym and his mother. But this year, with Bellatrix at large, Narcissa had warned him to stay away, so he was staying at school. He had just settled at a table in the library to do a bit of revision after dinner, when that blasted cat jumped onto his table.
Draco, please see me in my office."
What in the name of Merlin's bollocks was it now? He made his way to the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, and found Umbridge in her office, surrounded by plates depicting cantering, frolicking kittens that gave Draco a serious case of the creeps. Professor Umbridge was not alone. A student, a young witch in Ravenclaw robes, with her hair covering her face, was lying on the delicate-looking pink settee in the corner of the office. For a brief, irrational moment, Draco worried that she was dead and that Professor Umbridge had killed her. But a sad little wail and long sniffle disabused him of that idea. "You called me, Professor."
"Ah, yes, Draco. I have it on good authority that there is a group of students who are meeting as part of an illicit club. They are performing dangerous magic, and they need to be caught and punished. I believe that Mr. Potter is in charge of the group."
A chill swept over Draco. It wasn't just Potter that was in danger. Hermione was as well. He knew that they were meeting tonight, possibly right now, because she'd said she could not come to the library tonight. There might not be time to warn her. "How can I help, Professor?" he asked superciliously.
"Have your inquisitorial squad meet me on the 7th floor in 10 minutes, near that tapestry that depicts the dancing trolls."
"Yes, Professor." He turned quickly and hurtled out of the door. Ducking into a boys' toilet nearby, he took out his handkerchief and spoke the password, Vinca Major. "You need to get everyone out of this meeting. Get back to your common rooms. Disperse. She is coming." He waited, but the handkerchief stayed the same temperature. She had not received the message. "Hermione, it's urgent. She's coming." Still nothing happened. Sodding hell, he swore. It was just his luck. She had likely taken off her jumper to perform whatever magic it was they were practicing. He had seen her do this for years in class, removing her jumper and outer robes in potions or charms as the weather grew warmer and her magic multiplied. He didn't know what to do. He needed help, and he didn't know where to turn. He couldn't exactly go to Professor Dumbledore. Dumbledore had no idea of his connection with Hermione, and would likely think it a trap, or a lie. Professor Snape, likewise, was little use. He would not go directly against Umbridge, and would likely not want to help Potter anyway. Plus, Draco had no idea where the group was meeting other than presumably the 7th floor. He needed a messenger to get to Potter and Hermione before it was too late. And then an idea crystallized in his head. Of course. The only question was, would his family's magic work? "Dobby," he half-whispered into the ether. The small elf popped into the restroom immediately, dressed absurdly in an oversized maroon jumper and mismatched socks, about a dozen or so knit hats balanced on his head. Draco tried to school the look of confusion and incredulity from his face. Now was not the time to question this elf's fashion choices.
"Yes, Master Draco?"
Somehow, Draco could tell that Dobby was using the term master, not out of a sense of servitude, but out of respect. "Just Draco, Dobby. Listen, I need you to do something for me right now, please. It's important. I need you to find your friend, Harry Potter." Chapter 33. Scarpering, Sparkling, Splinching. Draco didn't have much time. After having chivied Dobby off on his errand of warning Potter and Hermione's group of the impending danger, he hurriedly contacted the rest of the inquisitorial squad and had them assemble near the tapestry of the dancing trolls to await Professor Umbridge and August Filch.
"What are we doing here, Draco? I do have other things to do tonight,"
snapped Pansy, inspecting her fingernail polish for chips. The rest of the inquisitorial squad stood around looking almost as trollish as the creatures depicted in the tapestry behind them. "I'm not really sure. Umbridge just said to meet here." He lied. He had chosen not to tell them about their mission, hoping that they would be slow enough on the uptake to allow everyone time to disperse. The short, plump witch appeared a moment later, followed by the huffing and puffing bug-eyed Argus Filch and his manky bug-eyed cat, Mrs. Norris. "I trust you have your orders, squad?" she asked sweetly. The group looked back at her in confusion, though Draco had to admit that for most of them this was their typical look anyway, so nothing appeared out of order to Umbridge. But she'd not waited for an answer. She turned on her heel and paced the corridor a few times, whispering to herself. Ahead, a flood of students was hurrying away from them, running in small groups down the 2 corridors that led away from the inquisitorial squad. Draco saw a flash of curly brown hair retreat near the last of them, and huffed a short sigh of relief.
"What are you waiting for? Get them!"
Professor Umbridge yelled in annoyance at the squad. She tore off down the hall after Filch and the retreating students, already huffing with exertion after only a few steps. 5 of the other 6 members of the inquisitorial squad were not naturally lithe and mobile, and the retreating students had had a head start, so Draco felt sure that most of them would not be caught. Just to be on the safe side, however, Draco cast a quick sticking charm on Pansy's shoe soles, making every step slower and more laborious. He watched in amusement as she struggled against the charm. The last to emerge up ahead was Potter himself. He carried the sweater-clad elf, who miraculously held on to his tower of hats. Potter deposited the elf quickly on the floor and said something to him, likely telling him to pop away, which the elf did shortly. Draco watched as Potter looked about, then made as if to run. He had only a split second to think. Umbridge already knew that Potter was involved. Even if he got away, she would seek him out for punishment. If Draco caught Potter, not only would it make Draco look to the crazy witch like he was on Umbridge's side, but perhaps she might not bother to try and catch anyone else. He whipped out his wand and flicked it, muttering the incantation. Potter fell with a thud that Draco found mildly satisfying and amusing, despite the gravity of the moment. "Trip-jinx, Potter! Hey, Professor! Professor, I've got one!" he called to the slowly retreating back of Professor Umbridge. Umbridge had trundled off with Potter, who had shot him the nastiest of glares from behind his ugly glasses. Draco did not care. As far as he could tell, no one else had been caught, and Hermione was likely safe. He hurried down the hall where he had seen her disappear, ducking into an alcove and taking his handkerchief from his pocket. "Are you safe? Did you make it back to your common room?" Her reply came almost instantly.
"Yes, but I think they've caught Harry. All of the other Gryffindors made it back except for him."
"Yes, I was the one to catch him. I'm sorry about that. But Umbridge already knew he was involved. It was only a matter of time before she found him. You had enough warning to get away from him then. Dobby was able to tell you."
"You sent him! That was brilliant, Draco!"
"It's been known to happen from time to time, you know. I have it on good authority that Umbridge is busy right now. Any chance you can meet me behind that cantankerous statue?"
"It must have been Marietta Edgecombe. She didn't come to the meeting tonight. Well, she will get her just desserts, rest assured. Anyone who revealed the secret of our club would regret it," Hermione sighed. Not for the first time, Draco was reminded of how very Slytherin his witch could be. He was highly curious to see what Hermione considered just desserts for someone who snitched on her and her friends. "I'm just glad you're safe," he murmured into her hair, holding her close and rubbing his cheek into her curls. "It's getting serious, Hermione. I don't know what's going to happen after tonight. Potter might be expelled, for all I know, and if that happens, she's going to come for his friends next." He kissed her temple, then her ear. "What are your plans for the Easter holidays?" he asked softly. "I need to stay here. Exams are only about 7 weeks away, and it's our OWL year."
"That's good. I'll be here as well. Hopefully everything turns out all right." but Umbridge is going to be on the warpath, no matter what." They kissed each other goodnight for a few minutes, but not nearly long enough for him. He hurried back down to the dungeons, wondering what was happening to Potter, Professor Umbridge, and Marietta Edgecombe, and hoping that whatever it was, it didn't implicate Hermione. As it turned out, Potter had once again escaped punishment. If Draco didn't find that sanctimonious git so blasting annoying, he might actually admire the asshole. Professor Dumbledore had somehow left. Apparently he had taken the blame for the group meetings but had escaped. Disapparition, perhaps? But one could not disapparate within Hogwarts grounds, so who really knew? The fact that Professor Dumbledore had escaped was as equally unsurprising as Potter's freedom from punishment. Unfortunately, this meant that Professor Umbridge had nothing and no one left to keep her in check. Draco, along with Vince and Greg, was headed out of the castle to enjoy some fresh air before lunch the next day, when he heard Hermione's voice coming in the front door into the entrance hall. He looked sideways, seeing Umbridge coming out of the great hall, nearly within earshot of Hermione and her group.
Lording it all over the other teachers, the stupid, puffed-up, power-crazy old—
"Now, do you really want to finish that sentence, Granger?" Draco rushed to stop her from completing her thoughts, raising an eyebrow and flicking his eyes left towards Professor Umbridge as if to say, "Pay attention. There's danger nearby." After the encounter with Hermione, Ernie, Weasley, and Potter in the entrance hall, he had accepted the brief praise from Professor Umbridge with false modesty. Immediately after, he rushed into the broom cupboard nearby, in which he'd hidden with Hermione the night before their time on the Quidditch pitch. The entire contents of his stomach came rushing up and out, sick splattering upon the floor and the front of his robes and shoes. He had called her a mudblood. Again. It didn't matter that it was all a fucking act. It didn't even matter that she knew he didn't mean it. He had said the words, and all of her friends thought he meant them. And he knew that no matter how many times he told her otherwise, a part of her might still believe that his words to her were real. He vanished the sick and slumped to the floor, knocking brooms and mops to the side as he dropped his head in his hands. He didn't want to be here anymore, but he couldn't go home right now either. There was nowhere to turn, no one to turn to except Hermione, and he had to pretend that he hated her and everything she stood for. He wiped fiercely at his eyes, pretending even to himself that it was only sweat. Removing the handkerchief from his breast pocket, he mopped at his face. If ever there was a time that he needed a handkerchief, a solace, that time was now. Bang! Draco jolted awake, surprised that he had somehow fallen asleep in this musty broom cupboard, although, considering how little sleep he'd gotten the night before, it really shouldn't have been that surprising. He checked his watch, realizing that lunch was nearly over. Bang! 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 What the hell was all this now? He stepped as unobtrusively as he could out of the closet, and looked around furtively, soon realizing that it would not have mattered if he had run out of the closet naked and screaming. The focus of every student in the school, it seemed, was on the most spectacular display of fireworks that Draco had ever seen. This was saying something, particularly seeing as his parents had New Year's parties every year. The copious amounts of sparkling shapes and animals danced across the high ceiling of the entrance hall, cartwheeling and spinning maniacally, spelling out curse words and insults. Draco tried very hard not to laugh. He could not be certain, but he had little doubt that this was the work of the Weasley twins. Even most of the Slytherins had to admit that the pair of them were forces to be reckoned with, and today looked no different. Professor Umbridge and August Filch stood at the head of the stairs, trying in vain to vanish them. Well, Umbridge was. Filch appeared to be trying to catch flies with his open mouth as he stared in awe. Suffice to say, the afternoon was a useless endeavour for everyone in the castle. No one could hear themselves think over the whizzes and bangs going off overhead. Even the professors seemed to enjoy the show, allowing the students to skive off lessons and chatter amongst themselves in the classes. Draco had to laugh to himself. Professor Umbridge's first day as headmistress had been a real showstopper. Definitely one for the ages, he thought to himself. The week before the Easter holidays dragged on for what seemed like forever. Whilst the random leftover firework still provided the occasional lift in spirits, generally most of the students were just looking forward to the extended break. Even the inquisitorial squad had lost its fervour. Millie and Greg were always together and were generally nowhere to be found at any time besides classes and meals. Pansy had decided that Warrington wasn't enough. She was now also dating a fourth year named Urquhart, who walked around dazedly looking as though he couldn't believe his luck. Crabbe did nothing without his other half, Goyle, so he had been listlessly sitting around the common room, picking on first years. And Montague? Well, to be honest, Draco had no idea where Montague was. No one had seen him in days. It seemed unlikely that he'd run away, but Draco couldn't be sure, as he truthfully didn't know much about the bloke. Draco was on his way to an evening Quidditch practice when that sodding silver cat showed up.
"Ahem! Mr. Malfoy, I need your help. Please fetch Professor Snape from his office and meet me on the 4th floor of the girls' lavatory. We've located Montague. He appears to be confounded and stuck in the toilet."
Draco swallowed a whole lot of questions and hurried to the dungeons. Stuck in a girl's toilet. He didn't know Montague that well, but he didn't think he was that big of a pervert. Draco knocked, then burst into Professor Snape's office. "Professor Snape, sir! Oh, sorry." Snape and Potter were across the room from each other, facing off confrontationally. "It's all right, Draco. Potter is here for a little remedial potions." Potter glared at him, and Draco smirked in glee. This was the story they'd come up with to cover his occlumency lessons. Well, it certainly was believable if Potter's work in actual potions class was anything to go by. I didn't know. Potter's face burned with fury at Draco's clear enjoyment of the whole thing. "Well, Draco, what is it?" "It's Professor Umbridge, sir. She needs your help. They've found Montague, sir. He's jammed up in a toilet on the 4th floor." "How did he get in there?" "I don't know, sir. He's a bit confused," Draco explained. Very well. Very well. Potter, we shall resume this lesson tomorrow evening instead." Professor Snape rushed from the room, and Draco could not resist one last laugh. It didn't matter that Potter wasn't actually taking remedial potions, only that he thought that Draco thought he was. "Remedial potions!" he guffawed, then ran after Professor Snape. Montague was not just stuck in the toilet. He seemed partially embedded in it, one arm and half his torso emerging from the U-bend. The rest of his body was apparently there, only shrunk and contorted painfully in the pipes. Draco was certain that this was the stuff of nightmares. It took Professors Snape, McGonagall, and Flitwick about 20 minutes to properly free him, whilst he, Warrington, and the second-year Gryffindor witch, who had found him, looked on. The young girl was cowering in the corner, shaking like a leaf. How very un-Gryffindor of her, Draco thought snidely. Still, for all of his bravado, Draco had nightmares about human-eating toilets that night. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.